Hello folks, in this video I'm going to complete exercise number 3. So, I've downloaded a few things. I've downloaded the Smarty Starter. I've downloaded the guest book table. And I've started the exercise 2 code. So that's going to give us all the code we need to get started. But let's just open up the exercise to make sure we all know what has to be done. So the exercise simply says, where is it? Okay, there we go. It simply says to take exercise 2 and add a Smarty template to it. So we're going to take the code we wrote for exercise number 2 and clean it up so that there's no mixture of PHP and HTML. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my database. So I'm going to go to EasyPHP. So right here I'm going to choose administration. I'm going to open up phpMyAdmin. You'll remember that in order to import a database, we only import the contents of the database, but the database itself has to already be created. So I'm going to go into databases, and I'm going to create the guest book database. So I'm going to create that database, and you'll notice if I choose it, there's no tables, right? No tables found. So I'm going to import, and I'm going to navigate by choose file. I'm going to navigate to where that particular file is. In your case, it might be on the desktop or somewhere. Just navigate to the file that you downloaded. I'm going to open that. And I'll just click go. You'll see if I go to structure, the guest book table exists. Now, I'm going to actually go, I'm going to choose the table, and I'm just going to insert one record because I want to do a little demo after. So the ID is an auto increment. The name, I'll just put Chris. And the message, I'll just put the message. And the timestamp has a default of current timestamp. So let's go ahead and insert that data. Okay, so if we go to browse, we see that we have one row of data. Great, the database is all set up. So I'm actually going to close this for now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into NetBeans. I already have it open here. And I'm going to create a new project. It's going to be a regular PHP project. I'm just going to call it GB for guest book. And I'm going to browse, and I'm going to make sure I store it in the local web if we're using PHP. If we're using EasyPHP, and I'm going to call it GB for guest book. And we're going to run it from the local server. That's our URL, so everything looks good. Now, like always, we get a default index page, so I'm going to remove that index page. So right now, this GB project is empty, so I'm going to go back to EasyPHP and explore. I'll just put this on the side, and you'll see we have the GB directory. So the things I need in here, number 1, is the code from exercise number 2. So I'm going to stick that in. The second thing I need is the Smarty Starter folder. So let's throw that in as well. So basically, I've taken some code and I've recreated the project. Great. So now let's go back to NetBeans And you'll notice it still shows as empty. As I said in class, NetBeans doesn't automatically update things if they get put in the folder. So the way we do it is we scan it for external changes. And there we go. Now, this is the code exactly as it was in exercise number 2. So let's try it out to make sure it works. And we see there's the message I put in manually. And I'll try a second message. So I'll put here test name. And I'll put here test message. Oops. Message. And I'll click post. You'll notice that we get the new message. It comes out on top because we're ordering it in descending order. So that just proves that we got the project up and running. So now let's actually do our task. Our task is to put in a Smarty template. Why? Well, if we look at the index page, you'll see that we have quite a mixture of some HTML, some PHP, some HTML, some PHP, and so forth. So basically, I'm going to copy the HTML part of the page. So I'm going to start at line 60, go down to line 65. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go over into Smarty, into templates, and I'm going to create a page there. So it'll be a new HTML page, and I'm simply going to call it index. I'm going to remove the code that we get by default, and I'm going to put this code in here. You'll notice there's some PHP code in here, so I'm just going to remove all the PHP code. So essentially, I'm going to leave it like that for the moment. I'm going to come back and do some Smarty stuff in a few moments, but you'll see this is just the HTML. So I've taken the HTML out of the index PHP and I've made a new page. So let's go back here and clean up the index page. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the majority of the HTML. So I'm going to get rid of the bottom part of the page here. And I'm going to get rid of all of this up to here. And you'll notice I have two PHP, a closed PHP and an open PHP, so I'll clean that up. Then I'll select everything and I'll do my Shift-Alt-F just to clean up the code. So now, let's just recap how this code works. The first thing I do is check if the post button was pressed. If the post button was pressed, I do an insert. That stays good. Now, the next thing I do is I select the existing data. Now, if you remember from class, we have to send all the data to Smarty in one shot. So here I'm doing a bunch of fetches. So I'm going to take out this HTML and I'm going to store all the rows in an array of arrays. So I'm going to start by creating the rows array. So I'm going to make that a blank array. Now, if you notice in the fetch, I'm fetching three things: the name, the message, and the date. So let's go ahead and create another array called a row and create a name portion. I'm going to set that to name. I'm then going to create a row, and we'll call this the message section. And I'm going to make that message. And finally, I'm going to add another element to this array called date. And that will equal date. So, inside this loop, I've created an array called arrow, and I've filled it with the data I fetched. I now need to put this array into the main array. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to say the rows with an empty array index equals $arrow. The empty array index means let's add it to the end. So let's recap. I connect to the database. If the post array is clicked, then I do the insert. I then select all the data in the table and I store it as an array of arrays called the rows. So let's see how this looks so far. So I'm going to make a pre-tag. I'm then going to print the rows, and then I'll close the pre-tag. This will just show you that the structure of the data is correct. So if I run this, you'll see I get an array which contains two elements, 0 and 1, each of which are the arrays of the data. So that looks pretty good in terms of what we need. Okay, so now, let's take this out. Our next job is to set that array to Smarty. So, we need to require once Smarty libs Smarty dot class dot PHP. So we have Smarty available to us. So I have to create my Smarty object. So I'm going to say Smarty equals new Smarty. I then have to tell Smarty where the templates are. So that was called set template dir. And the templates are kept where? In Smarty templates. And I'm going to copy that, paste it, and I also have to tell Smarty about where the compile directory is. And that is set compiled here, and that's just _C. So, okay. So, I created my Smarty object, I set up the templates here. I now need to assign, I have to send the data to Smarty. So, I'm going to send it to Smarty as something called table rows. Remember, this can be made up and it only has meaning to Smarty. I want to associate that to which PHP variable? The rows. So I'm sending the rows to Smarty, and in Smarty it's going to be named table rows. I could name them the same, but I name them differently just to make sure that you know you could do that. I'm finally going to display index.html. Remembering that index.html is our template. So I've set up Smarty, I assign the data, and I displayed the template. So let's go back to the template and do one last thing here. Right here, we have to dump out all the template rows. So, sorry, all the table rows. So I have to go into Smarty and do a Smarty for each loop. The way it works is we say from. Now, where are we going to get the data from? Well, I created a Smarty variable called table rows. Notice there's a $sign here, but there's no $sign here. That's just the way Smarty works. And which item are we going to use? We're going to call this A row. I just made this up. You can use anything you want here. The idea is Smarty's going to go through this array, updating item each time. Now, I want to make sure that I remember to close the for each. And in between here, I have to dump a row of my table. So I'm just going to do a copy paste. Now, instead of name, I need the name from the current row. So I'm going to put the Smarty dollar A row dot name. So this says dump out the name portion of the current row. I'm going to do the same thing for message. So Smarty dollar A row dot message. And then finally one more time, Smarty dollar A row dot date. Now, if we look at this file, it's almost all HTML with a little bit of Smarty code. So, it's mostly presentation. If we look at this file, it's completely PHP with no HTML. So I've successfully broken it up into application logic and presentation logic. So your designers can work on the HTML and coders can work on the PHP. So let's try it out. There we go. It looks just like before. No difference. I'll try adding another name and another message. And I'll post that. And it comes up. So it behaves exactly like it did before, except this time we've successfully separated our different types of logic. Okay, keep on going, guys. If you need anything, well, let me know. If you want me to explain anything else, just send me an email. And I will see you next week in class. Have a great day.